This is ABC Fora.
You know, as General McChrystal, who's the commander in Afghanistan, says now, the way to defeat roadside bombs is not to shoot the bomber, it's to convince the community to tell you where the bomb is. And that's what we managed to do in the second half of the surge. But to make that happen, we had to get out on the ground and show them that it was possible. So Petraeus was out every day on the ground, and I was out with him, working with units, trying to convince them that we could do it better. And on this one occasion, he was eating an ice cream, talking to an Iraqi standing next to a car, and this big crowd of kids gathered. And I was getting very, very nervous. There was a big difference between the Shia groups and the Sunni groups in Iraq. Partly it was a matter of theology, but it was also a matter of tactics. You'd be driving down the road in a Shia district and suddenly traffic would disappear, and you see women grabbing their kids and pulling them inside the house, and you'd know you're about to get hit. And I can remember driving down the street and this happening and going, shit, pull over. And you pull over just in time, and huge car bomb. And this is the way that the Shia groups like Jaish al-Mahdi did business. The Sunnis would just rock and roll in a street full of children. Different approach, Al-Qaeda guys. And I've seen them do absolutely horrendous things to their own people, their own children, just for the sake of killing one American. And so here we were in a Sunni district surrounded by kids, and I was like, you know, we're going to get hit here, and 40 children are going to get killed. The way that we would have done it in the past would have been in vehicles, would have swept these kids out of the way and driven through, and you know, instead on this occasion, I bought a soccer ball from a stall, and we started playing soccer. And General Petraeus took his helmet off, and we started kicking the ball around with the children, and we managed to kick it far enough that they basically ran off the street after it, and then we disappeared. So, you know, it sounds kind of simple, but that was him setting an example for the troops on the ground. And once they finally figured out that it was actually safer to show the Iraqis some respect, they all got religion, and we started doing it, and the thing turned around pretty quickly.
Well, now, another of the notorious things to come out of the conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq is the suggestion that torture has been used. And I know that the Bush administration had a fairly flexible definition of torture so as to keep themselves on the right side of the line as they saw it, but waterboarding is either torture or, in your view, attempted murder, and we know that that was used. Now, here's a hypothetical problem. Let's suppose you're in Iraq and you've taken a guy who clearly knows a lot about stuff that's happening, and President Obama is about to make a flying visit to Iraq. And this guy knows, because he's told you, that there will be an attempt on Obama's life, and he has the details, but he won't tell you. The question is, will you torture him in order to find the details in order to protect the life of President Obama?
Absolutely not. I think that, you know, I've worked through in the field and also in theory this whole so-called ticking bomb scenario. You know, if that's the real situation, you tell the president to call the visit off, or he goes to a different airport. Or, you know, it's actually pretty simple to reroute a presidential motorcade. You know, it's not that difficult. But let's take it to the absolute hypothetical extreme of the ticking bomb scenario, where the terrorist knows where the bomb is and when it's going to go off. Even under those circumstances, I don't think that it's a valid situation to be torturing someone. Why? Because terrorism is an existential threat to societies, but it's not an existential threat in the sense that the terrorists can destroy societies. It's an existential threat in the sense that the terrorists can make us do things that stop us from being ourselves. You can actually destroy society within by the way you react to terrorism. And so let's take it even to a further extreme of it. The terrorist has a nuclear weapon, and they're going to set it off in a city, let's say a city in America. If terrorists were to set off a nuclear weapon in a city in America, it wouldn't destroy America. It would be terrible. You know, 1 million people might die. It would be absolutely horrendous. You would do almost anything to avoid that happening. But if you torture someone in order to prevent that, that ultimately destroys America. Because America is not just a bunch of cities and a coastline. It's a whole democratic way of life founded on principles from the 18th century of the Enlightenment, the rule of law, and limited government, and a government that governs by the consent of its people. And torturing people ultimately takes you down a completely different path. And it doesn't stop there. You know, you do it once, you know, who's to say it's not going to come up again? So, you know, both as a practical matter and as an ethical issue for people that live in a democracy, I just don't think there's any circumstance in which it makes more sense to torture the guy than just change your plans or try to, to avoid the thing happening.
I think it was last year or the year before, Darius Rejali published a very big book called Torture and Democracy, in which he makes a very convincing case that, as a matter of practicality, torture does not produce effective, accurate, reliable intelligence. But of course, the ethical dimension of it was dealt with in a case in the House of Lords in England, I think 2 or 3 years ago. The British Parliament had passed a law which provided for the indefinite incarceration of people who were suspected terrorists or terrorist threats, but not people who could be charged with anything, because there wasn't any evidence that they'd done anything wrong. But they couldn't be removed from the country, because to do so would return them to a place where they would be tortured or killed. And by an overwhelming majority, I think there's only one dissent, the House of Lords said that the threat to democracy does not lie with the terrorists, but in laws like those. And that's really a sort of judicial endorsement of your theory. And of course, if you're looking at the ends that you achieve by torturing, it may or may not be reliable intelligence, but it will also be a fundamental change in the character of the society that you're seeking to defend.
Right, and excuse me, taking it from one end of the spectrum to the other, excuse me, pretty much any set of counter-terrorism security measures can have a very damaging effect on society and on the campaign against terrorism if you don't look at them in a broader context of the political discourse. So let's talk about airline security measures. Every time you go through an airline metal detector now, you've got to take your shoes off. It's the Richard Reed Memorial, shoe removal because of the shoe bombing. There's about 100 million people go through airports in a day around the world. That's 100 million people that at some level of their mind, at some moment, are thinking about Al-Qaeda. It's free advertising for Al-Qaeda. 100 million people every day. And it also sends the message, we, the government, think that Al-Qaeda is such an important threat that we're putting in place all these very expensive and draconian security measures. And it pumps them up to a level where they probably wouldn't be without all those measures. And I think that one of the principles which you have learned in the counterinsurgency world is you have to make security measures as transparent as possible to the population so they don't disrupt people's daily lives and they don't have cause to remind people all the time that there's a terrorist threat out there, getting the environment back to normal.
This is ABC Fora.